Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks, my mother said, waving one manicured hand as if she were brushing lint from the table. Kind of like a janitor. It pays the bills, I guess. Her rehearsed socialite smile never slipped as she spoke to my younger sister's future in-laws. My father did not even bother looking at me. He took a slow sip of bourbon, nodded, and added, "Honestly, every family has one disappointment, right? We gave up on her a long time ago." 23 people sat around the private dining room at the Birchwood, and every one of them turned to stare at me. Then Catherine Ellsworth, the groom's mother and a former Navy admiral, set down her fork. 18 months earlier, I had sat across from her in a secured defense briefing room and negotiated a multi-million-dollar contract. Now she looked directly into my eyes and asked, in a low voice that froze the entire room, "Hold on. Are you the major?" My mother's face went pale. What followed over the next 40 minutes shattered the version of our family that she had spent decades constructing. But that engagement dinner was only the explosion. The fuse had been burning for 10 years. Catherine's question hung over the mahogany table. I did not blink. In the dirt, when an explosive goes off, you do not scream or thrash around. You check your limbs, assess the damage, and establish the perimeter. My jaw locked, my spine straightened, and my body slipped automatically into the discipline of parade rest. At the head of the table, Diane gripped the white linen until her knuckles lost their color. Gerald's bourbon glass trembled softly. Paige twisted the diamond ring on her finger, the silk of her gown flashing under the chandelier. I remembered freezing deployments, cold MREs, and every dollar of hazard pay I had sent home when my mother said Paige needed help. They had taken money earned in mud and blood, used it to build this polished life, and then called me a garbage collector. My $15 navy blouse rubbed against the keloid shrapnel scar on my shoulder, and my calloused hands rested motionless in my lap. I did not need to shout. I had spent a decade learning how to stay steady while everything around me broke. To understand why that room could not break me, you have to go back to a suffocating July night in Carver, Indiana, when I was 22 years old and the war inside my family officially began. Carver was the kind of Midwestern town where appearances were treated like religion. Our house always reeked of lemon bleach, a sterile chemical smell Diane used to cover whatever rot might be hiding underneath the floorboards. She treated her daughters like accessories. Paige and I were not people to her. We were evidence she could display to prove that her own abandoned ambitions and resentment had not gone to waste. The living room looked like a museum dedicated to Paige. One wall held pageant trophies, debate awards, marketing certificates, and sorority photographs, all framed in dark cherry wood. My entire existence was represented by one faded high school graduation picture, shoved behind a plastic fern on the back of a shelf. Diane wanted daughters in tailored suits, women with white-collar titles and corner offices she could brag about at the country club. She did not want a soldier. She wanted polished ornaments for her ego. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, drinking warm tap water when she marched in, her heels striking the linoleum with sharp, angry clicks. She slammed a thick stack of papers onto the Formica countertop, hard enough to rattle my glass. "Sign them," she ordered. I looked down. The packet contained applications for a private student loan and an MBA program that would leave me $8,000 in debt. Diane had already forged my initials on the deposit slip. She wanted me to accept a financial sentence so she could tell strangers that her daughter was earning a master's degree. I said nothing. I slowly pushed the paperwork aside, opened the manila folder in front of me, and removed one crisp sheet. It was my United States Marine Corps contract, signed and dated in black ink. I slid it across the table until the edge touched her manicured fingers. Diane stared at the bold lettering and stopped breathing. I counted the seconds in my head while the cheap wall clock ticked in the silence. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 13, 14. Exactly 14 seconds passed before the skin around her eyes tightened and her lips twisted into a snarl. "You want to go scrub toilets at some filthy military base?" she hissed. "You want to roll around in the mud with high school dropouts just to humiliate me?" Gerald dragged himself into the kitchen. He looked at Diane, then at the Marine Corps paper, and rubbed the back of his neck without meeting my eyes. He did not ask whether I was sure. He did not tell me to be careful. He did not say he was proud that I had chosen something difficult. I already told my boss you were getting your master's degree, he muttered. If you do this blue-collar nonsense, how am I supposed to show my face at work tomorrow? You are making a fool out of me. A soft, arrogant scoff came from the hallway. Paige leaned against the doorframe with her eyes fixed on her phone. She did not even look up. You are always pulling some dramatic stunt for attention, Chloe. It is pathetic. In less than a minute, the perimeter was overrun. I had no backup and no support. Diane slammed her palm against the table and leaned close enough for me to smell stale coffee on her breath. If you walk out that door for this boot camp, you get nothing, she said. Not one red cent from this house. You will be dead to this family. I stood, pushed in my chair, and did not argue. You cannot negotiate with people who need your surrender more than they want the truth. I went upstairs, packed 3 pairs of jeans, a few plain shirts, and a toothbrush into an olive green canvas duffel bag, then pulled the brass zipper shut. The sound felt final. I threw the strap over my shoulder, walked downstairs, opened the front door, and stepped into the thick Indiana night. A rocking chair creaked in the shadows of the porch. Grandma Ruth was waiting there with a small bundle in her lap. She rose slowly, her knees cracking, but her grip was iron when she caught my hand. She pressed a tightly folded cotton handkerchief into my palm. The fabric was old and rough, embroidered with the initials R.H. Inside it were 8 worn $100 bills. She looked directly into my eyes, and her voice carried more strength than everyone inside that house combined. Use this to wipe your sweat, she said. Do not ever use it to wipe your tears. Go. I closed my fingers around the handkerchief. It was the only real support I had left. I turned my back on the house, walked down the driveway, and threw the duffel onto the cracked leather back seat of my old Ford. When I turned the key, the engine roared to life and tore through the silence of the Carver night. I pressed the gas, the tires scraped against the asphalt, and the house disappeared behind me. The roar of that engine became another sound in my memory. The blistering heat, the pounding of boots, and the voice of a Marine Corps drill instructor shouting from inches away from my face at Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. OCS was a meat grinder built to strip people down to their raw nerves. No one cared about my feelings, my family history, or the reasons I had come. They cared whether I could perform, whether I could endure, and whether I could keep moving when every part of my body wanted to stop. During those first months, I did exactly what Diane had mocked me for. I scrubbed toilets, hundreds of them. I spent hours on my knees on cold concrete, using a stiff brush to dig grime out of grout. The skin across my knuckles split. Blisters opened, leaked, and bled over the bristles. Industrial bleach burned every crack in my hands. I never complained. I never quit. The work did not humiliate me. It taught me that no honest task was beneath me, and that discipline mattered more than appearances. The field was worse. Virginia mud clung like wet cement, soaked through my boots, and hardened into heavy crusts on my uniform during night maneuvers. My muscles burned until they went numb. I learned to strip and reassemble an M4 in darkness, while my hands shook from cold. I learned to carry an 80-pound pack, drag another candidate out of a simulated kill zone, and keep moving while smoke grenades tore at my lungs. I traded comfort, blood, and sleep for something I had never received in Carver. Respect. Not the fragile approval Diane gave to titles she could brag about, but the kind of respect earned from people willing to trust you with their lives. 3 years later, the work paid off. The Marine Corps did not care what my mother thought of me. It measured performance under pressure. I earned my commission and eventually pinned on the twin silver bars of a captain. I was given direct command of 38 Marines in a specialized logistics unit. I did not spend my days hiding behind a desk. I managed supply lines that kept people alive in hostile zones. Ammunition, medical equipment, fuel, food, communications gear, and every other resource a unit needed to operate. If I failed, people could die. I completed back-to-back deployments. I ate cold MREs, slept on sagging folding cots, and learned to rest through distant explosions and the constant mechanical hum of generators. I saved every dollar of hazard pay I could. While Paige bought designer handbags on Diane's credit cards, I kept my money in a separate account and wired part of it home whenever my mother claimed my sister needed help. The rest became the foundation for a life no one could take from me. I bought a small 2-bedroom condo in North Carolina and paid the down payment myself. I remember the exact moment the realtor placed the keys in my hand. The metal was cold, and the jagged edge pressed into my calloused palm. I stood alone in the empty living room, surrounded by the smell of fresh drywall paint and cheap carpet. There was no furniture, no family waiting with champagne, and no parent who had co-signed a thing. But the place was mine. I was a Marine captain, a homeowner, and a commander responsible for 38 lives. For one foolish moment, I believed I had finally done enough to make the Holloways proud. I was inside a canvas command tent when I called Indiana. Humid air pressed against the green fabric, while wind rattled the metal frame. I lifted the bulky satellite phone and dialed the number I still knew by memory. Static hissed against my ear before Diane answered with a rushed, irritated hello. "Mom, it is Chloe," I said. My grip tightened around the receiver. "I got promoted today. I am a captain now. I command 38 Marines. And I bought a condo. I closed on it this morning." I waited through the crackle of the line. I wanted one word. "Congratulations. I was proud of you." Anything. Instead, Diane released a short nasal sigh. "So what?" she asked, sounding annoyed that I had interrupted her day. "Does that mean you have to lead 38 people to sweep up garbage around the base now?" The words struck like a blow to the sternum. My vision narrowed for a second. Before I could answer, I heard Gerald clear his throat in the background. The phone shifted to speaker, and his voice came through loud and excited. "Listen, Chloe. Your sister just got promoted to marketing manager. She is getting a corner office. We are taking her to the steakhouse to celebrate, so we have to go. We will talk later." I stared at the green canvas wall. My deployments, my command, the responsibility of keeping 38 Marines supplied and alive, the condo I had purchased without help, and every sacrifice behind those things meant nothing to them. I was working in places where one missing shipment could cost lives, and they were throwing a celebration because Paige had been given a desk beside a window. I did not argue or try to explain the difference between an officer and a janitor. "Okay," I said, and ended the call. The silence inside the tent was absolute. I sat on the edge of a metal chair, reached for the Velcro name tape on my uniform, and ripped it from my chest. The tearing sound echoed in the small space. I laid it on the desk and stared at the stitched letters. Holloway. That was when I understood the central truth of the war they had been fighting against me. You cannot change the mind of someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. Diane, Gerald, and Paige had assigned me the role of family failure years earlier. The role served them. It made Paige look brighter and gave my parents someone to blame for every discomfort in their lives. If I returned with the highest award in the country, they would ask why it was not made of solid gold. They needed me beneath them so they could feel tall. I removed the back of the satellite phone and pulled out my personal SIM card. I held the tiny square between my fingers and bent it until it snapped. The gold chip cracked through the center. I dropped both pieces into the metal trash can. From that moment, I initiated total radio silence. No updates, no holidays, no explanations, no attempts to prove that my life had value. 7 years passed. Silence became a weapon, and I learned how to use it. I did not call. I did not send cards. I stopped asking for permission to exist. By the time Paige reached me again, I was Major Chloe Holloway, commanding officer of a special tactical logistics unit in the United States Marine Corps. 283 Marines operated under my direct command. I coordinated life-or-death material transport across 14 military installations in the East Coast and Midwest sectors. I did not ask my parents for an allowance. I approved monthly operating budgets measured in millions of dollars. My office reflected the life I had built. The desk was a wide slab of gray steel. There were no plastic flowers, no inspirational signs, and no framed photographs of a smiling family that had never existed. The only personal object sat beside my keyboard, a scratched brass 56mm shell casing I had dug from the dirt during my first combat deployment. It was cold, tarnished, and ordinary, but it reminded me of the cost of failure and the weight of every decision made under pressure. Master Sergeant Maria entered one morning, her combat boots striking the linoleum in a steady rhythm. She set a thick ceramic mug of black coffee on my desk. The bitter smell of dark roast filled the sterile office. Maria was a first-generation immigrant from Guatemala, with a jagged white scar across her chin from a shrapnel burst. She did not smile often, and she never wasted words, but she would have taken a bullet for me without hesitation. I would have done the same for her. That was family as I understood it. Blood was biology, loyalty was earned in the dirt. 18 months before Paige's engagement dinner, the Department of Defense opened bids for a major tactical partnership. The primary contractor was Ellsworth Defense Group, a giant in the military-industrial world. I entered a secured, windowless boardroom in Columbus, Ohio, carrying a 40-page operations plan. The air conditioning was cold enough to sting. A dozen executives in expensive suits sat around an enormous oak table, but the only person I watched was the woman at the head of it. Catherine Ellsworth had retired from the Navy and become chief executive of the defense group. She wore a charcoal suit, and her gray hair was cut into a severe bob. Her eyes were the color of winter steel. She did not smile when I entered or waste time on small talk. I walked to her end of the table and placed the operations plan in front of her. The thick packet struck the polished wood with a hard slap. Catherine opened the folder. She ignored the projected profit margins and quarterly gains. Her finger moved down the pages that detailed casualty projections, field medicine, evacuation routes, and supply vulnerabilities. The boardroom stayed silent, except for the crisp sound of paper turning. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me. "Major Holloway," she said, "why are you prioritizing mobile trauma units and field medevac capacity over heavy artillery requisitions?" It was a test. She wanted to know whether I was there to please executives or protect Marines. I straightened my spine and answered without blinking, "Because the mission comes first, Admiral. But the lives of the Marines under my command are priceless. Heavy artillery can secure a grid. No amount of corporate savings can compensate for sending my people home in body bags. I will not bleed my unit dry to make a performance report look better." Several executives shifted in their leather chairs. Catherine did not. Her eyes moved over the set of my jaw, then down to the white scars across my knuckles, the same marks Diane had once treated as proof that I was dirty and beneath her. Catherine rose and extended her hand across the table. "I have sat in this chair a long time," she said. "I have never seen an officer prioritize the pulse of her people over a polished report. The $8 million contract is yours, Major." I shook her hand. Her grip was hard and steady. That single gesture gave me something my family had tried to strip from me in the kitchen 10 years earlier. Honor recognized by someone who understood its cost. Diane had predicted I would become a janitor, a failure, and a joke. Instead, I had entered a room filled with powerful people and been treated as an equal. Back in my office, I placed the finalized Ellsworth contract inside the wall safe and pushed the steel door closed. The locking mechanism engaged with a deep metallic click. Outside my window, the base moved with its usual disciplined rhythm. I had built a fortress around my life, one decision at a time. Then the desk phone rang. The caller identification showed an Indiana area code. I stared at it, jaw tight, before lifting the receiver. "Major Holloway." A familiar nasal sigh came through the line. "Are you still alive?" Paige asked. It was the first time I had heard her voice in 7 years. There was no apology and no question about my life. "I am getting engaged this weekend. Mom says you have to be there. The groom's family has serious money, and we need to look like a complete, happy family for the photographs. Do not ruin this for me." I nearly hung up. Carver was no longer home. It was a graveyard of old expectations and carefully buried pain. But Paige mentioned 2 things that stopped me. The groom's last name was Ellsworth, and Grandma Ruth, now confined to a wheelchair, insisted on attending because she wanted to see me. Catherine's family name triggered every tactical instinct I had. Ruth was my one emotional blind spot. On Saturday afternoon, I drove 4 hours to Carver. The tires of my truck rolled across hot asphalt as I entered the parking lot of the Birchwood, an expensive steakhouse where local families went to perform wealth and class. I planned my appearance carefully. No dress uniform, no oak leaves at my collar, no medals. I wore the $15 navy blouse, gray slacks, and sensible black flats. The cheap fabric rubbed against the raised scar on my shoulder. It was perfect camouflage. I was entering hostile territory, and I had no interest in announcing my rank. Diane stood inside the glass doors, controlling the entrance like a gatekeeper. Her cocktail dress was tight, her foundation thick, and the air around her was saturated with rose perfume. The moment she saw me, her social smile vanished. Her eyes traveled from my plain hair to my flat shoes with undisguised contempt. "You look very comfortable," she said. "I thought you would wear something more presentable for an important event." She clamped one hand onto my shoulder. Her acrylic nails pressed through the thin fabric and into my skin. It was not affection. It was a physical command to remember my place. I did not flinch. Over her shoulder, Gerald stood with a bourbon glass. He caught my eye and immediately looked down at the geometric pattern in the carpet. Pretending I was invisible was still easier for him than defending me. "Chloe." Paige approached with a tall, nervous-looking man on her arm. Her silk satin gown had a high slit and reflected the chandelier light. It looked exactly like the hazard pay I had once sent home. She stopped in front of me without offering a hug. "Garrett, this is my older sister, Chloe," she said in a slow, pitying tone. "She works at some military camps far away. She does not really have a specific title or anything important." Garrett gave me an awkward, polite smile and extended his hand. Beneath my sleeves, my fingers curled into my palms. I did not strike back. You do not waste ammunition on someone who is only repeating orders. I looked once at Paige's ring, and then at her face. "Congratulations," I said. Before entering the dining room, I stepped toward the quiet lounge near the lobby, telling myself I needed a glass of water and a few seconds to reset. The lounge was deserted and smelled of old leather, floor wax, and expensive wood polish. Paige's phone lay in the center of a glass coffee table, still wrapped in its glittery pink case. I moved past it toward the water pitcher, but the screen lit up with a notification from the Holloway family group chat. The message was visible in full. "Mom, remember the plan. Absolutely do not let Chloe open her mouth tonight. The Ellsworths do not need to know we have a glorified janitor in the family." My stomach dropped. Whatever happened at dinner would not be a careless slip or a panicked attempt to save face. They had discussed me in advance, agreed on a cover story, and decided to bury me before the appetizers arrived. I slid one hand into my pocket and found Grandma Ruth's rough cotton handkerchief. My thumb pressed into the embroidered initials, R.H. The fabric grounded me. I took a slow breath, left the phone exactly where it was, and walked through the oak doors into the private dining room prepared for 23 guests. The room hummed with clinking ice and forced laughter. I scanned it automatically and found Grandma Ruth in the far corner beside a small table. I crossed the floor, knelt next to her wheelchair, and took her frail hand. Her skin felt like paper stretched over delicate bones. "My girl of steel is here," she whispered. A real smile spread across her weathered face. I squeezed her hand, and for a moment, the room disappeared. Then the doors opened again. A low heel struck the hardwood with an authoritative thud. Catherine Ellsworth entered in a dark, tailored suit, moving like a wolf into a room of people who had no idea what stood among them. She paused near the head of the table and surveyed the guests. Her gaze passed over Paige and Diane, then locked onto me in the corner. She recognized my posture before she registered the blouse. Her eyes narrowed. I saw the moment she identified the Marine major who had negotiated the $3.8 million contract across her boardroom table. We held each other's gaze. Before either of us moved, Diane tapped a silver spoon against her wineglass. The ringing sound cut through the conversation. "Everyone, please take your seats," she announced in a syrupy voice. "I want to say a few words about my beautiful family." The performance was beginning, and the detonator was already armed. Diane smoothed the front of her dress and launched into a speech polished by years of country club practice. She praised Paige's vision, ambition, and brilliant career in marketing. Then she moved around the table, presenting every Holloway relative by title as if she were reading from a corporate resume. Branch managers, real estate brokers, senior consultants, and business owners. Each name became another trophy arranged for the Ellsworth family's inspection. When she reached me, her eyes slid past my chair as though it were empty. Robert Ellsworth, Garrett's father, noticed. He leaned forward with a slight frown and looked toward me. "And what about you, Chloe?" he asked. "What do you do?" I opened my mouth, but Diane cut in before I could form the first word. "Oh, Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks," she said, waving her hand as though dismissing a minor inconvenience. Her smile stayed fixed. "Kind of like a janitor. It pays the bills, I guess." The air turned heavy. Gerald sat beside her, raised his bourbon, and nodded. He actually nodded. "Honestly, every family has one disappointment, right?" he said with a weak chuckle, meant to purchase the approval of rich strangers. "We gave up on her a long time ago. In less than 10 seconds, my parents reduced a decade of my life to garbage. 10 years of blood, frozen mud, sleepless nights, hazard pay, scars, responsibility, and decisions that had kept people alive were crushed into a joke and thrown into the center of the table. They sacrificed my entire existence because making me small helped them feel impressive. I did not cry, shout, or overturn the table. I became still. My spine locked, my shoulders squared, and the skin across my face went numb. The air conditioning hummed faintly overhead. I looked at Diane, then Gerald, and felt the last of my anger harden into cold clarity. The message on Paige's phone replayed in my head. "Absolutely do not let Chloe open her mouth tonight." This was not an accident. They had formed a firing squad in advance and agreed to pull the trigger together. I shifted my gaze down the length of the table toward Catherine. She sat perfectly still. She was not a civilian dazzled by country club theater. She had commanded fleets, managed crises, and spent a career reading people under pressure. Diane's smile could not fool her. Catherine lifted her silver fork above the porcelain plate and released it. Clack. The sound was not loud, but it carried through the room like a shot. Diane's smile vanished. Catherine looked directly at her, and a slow scowl formed across the former Admiral's face. Then she turned toward me and raised one eyebrow. "Hold on," she said. "Are you the Major?" The question landed on the table like a live grenade. No one reacted at first. Diane's carefully constructed mask slipped, exposing panic beneath the makeup. Her bracelets clattered as she waved her hands. "No, Catherine, you must be mistaken," she stammered. Her voice rose into a strained squeak. "Chloe is not a major. She just pushes a broom around the—" Catherine raised one finger. That was all. She did not shout or shift in her chair. The gesture silenced Diane instantly. "I am asking Chloe for a sitrep," Catherine said, her voice low and controlled. "If you do not mind, Diane." My mother closed her mouth so quickly that her teeth clicked. Gerald froze beside her, gripping his glass. I kept my posture straight and placed both hands flat on the white linen, fingers together. The cheap blouse pulled across my shoulders, but what I wore had no bearing on who I was. Discipline cannot be purchased at a boutique or hidden by clearance rack fabric. "Yes, Admiral," I said. My voice carried the clean precision of an officer on a radio net. "I am an active duty officer in the United States Marine Corps. I command a special tactical logistics unit." Paige's face twisted as though someone had struck her. The silk of her gown whispered against the chair when she turned toward Diane, silently begging our mother to repair the story. Diane could not. Her hands were locked around the edge of the table, and her knuckles had turned white. Only then did the word Admiral seem to register. She had spent the evening treating Catherine like another wealthy civilian, unaware that she was performing for a woman who understood exactly what a Marine officer's rank and responsibilities meant. Catherine kept her eyes on me. "Head count under your direct command? 283 Marines, ma'am. Operational scope? 14 domestic military installations, East Coast and Midwest sectors." Gerald's bourbon glass began to tremble. The ice knocked against the crystal in a nervous rhythm. He took a swallow, but his hand kept shaking. Diane stared at me with wide eyes. Her lips moved without sound before a whisper escaped. How? How is that possible? She could not process it. For 10 years, her identity had depended on having one successful daughter and one failure. Now, the daughter she had discarded controlled life-or-death logistics for hundreds of Marines and managed federal assets on a scale far beyond Paige's marketing department. The truth was not merely inconvenient. It destroyed the hierarchy Diane had built her entire family around. Robert Ellsworth leaned back and looked at Gerald with open disgust. The Ellsworths came from a defense background. They understood the weight of a commission, the demands of command, and the consequences of logistical failure. Under the restaurant chandeliers, the toxic core of the Holloway family was fully exposed. My parents had mocked a commissioned officer handling millions in federal resources because they assumed no one important would know enough to challenge the lie. Diane felt the judgment closing in. Her survival instinct took over. I watched her facial muscles twitch as she tried to rebuild the smile. She was preparing to claim it had been a joke. Then she would accuse me of hiding my career so I could embarrass her. Catherine denied her the chance. The former Admiral leaned back and reached for the black leather handbag in her lap. She released the magnetic clasp and slid one hand inside. Metal shifted against leather with a quiet, unmistakable sound. Conversation beyond the private doors seemed to fade. Every eye around the table followed her hand. Catherine withdrew a closed fist and held it above the center of the table. Then she opened her fingers. A heavy, gold-plated challenge coin dropped onto the polished mahogany. The restaurant light flashed across the etched Marine Corps emblem as the coin spun on its edge, humming in the silence. It lost momentum, wobbled, and fell flat with a hard smack. Catherine dragged it across the table until it stopped in front of Diane's plate. My defense group just closed a $3.8 million federal contract with Major Holloway's unit, Catherine said. Her voice never rose, but the weight of it pressed on everyone in the room. She personally commanded the live-fire tactical exercise, and she sat across from me in my boardroom to negotiate the terms. The effect was total. All color drained from Diane's face until her skin resembled wet cement. Gerald's mouth fell open. He stared at the coin as if it might strike him. Robert folded his arms and leaned toward my father. You just told me you gave up on a commissioned military officer who handles millions in federal assets, he said. Are you out of your mind? The Holloway reputation shattered in a single moment. Diane had spent decades polishing a perfect image for strangers, and now that image lay in pieces at a steakhouse table. But people like her rarely apologize when cornered. They rewrite the script. Her eyes filled with sudden tears. She slammed her palm against the table and pointed at me. We did not know, she wailed, her voice breaking with theatrical precision. She hid this from us. She kept her whole life secret on purpose so she could set a trap and humiliate us in front of your family tonight. The pattern was familiar. Deny the abuse, attack the victim, and claim martyrdom. I did not allow her room to expand the lie. I reported my promotion in year 3, I said. My voice was flat and cold. I told you I had made captain and was commanding 38 Marines. You asked whether that meant I had to lead 38 people in sweeping garbage around the base. Diane stopped crying. Rage replaced the fake grief. I never said that, she shrieked. You are a liar. I would never say something so disgusting to my own daughter. You said exactly that, Diane. The voice came from the back corner. Everyone turned. Grandma Ruth sat upright in her wheelchair with both hands wrapped around her wooden cane. Her jaw was set. You put Chloe on speakerphone in the kitchen, she continued. I was sitting at the table. I heard every vicious word that came out of your mouth. That was the final nail. Diane looked from Ruth to Paige, but Paige stared at her lap. She turned toward Gerald, who seemed to be shrinking into his chair. Then she looked at the Ellsworths and found only revulsion. There was nowhere left to hide. The room had become too bright for her lies. Diane snapped. She shoved back her chair so violently that the legs scraped across the floor. She rounded the table, seized my left arm, and dug her acrylic nails through my blouse directly over the shrapnel scar. Get out, she hissed. She yanked me from the chair and dragged me toward the doors. I let her. I had no intention of turning the engagement dinner into a physical fight. The oak doors opened, and she pulled me into the dim corridor. They closed behind us, removing the audience. Diane's socialite mask disappeared completely. Her chest heaved, her eyes were bloodshot, and she looked less like a wounded mother than a cornered animal whose performance had failed. She backed me against the textured wallpaper without releasing my arm. Her perfume was so strong that it seemed to coat my throat. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. "You ruined this family." I watched her carefully. She was not grieving the loss of a daughter. She was grieving the loss of control. Her nails pressed deeper. "If you walk out that door tonight, you lose everything," she said. "You will not have a family anymore. You will have absolutely nothing." It was the same threat she had used when I was 22, the last weapon of someone trying to hold biology hostage. I had looked into the eyes of 19-year-old Marines, bleeding in the dirt. I knew real fear. What I saw in Diane was not fear for another human being. It was the ugly panic of a fraud who had lost her audience. I caught her wrist with my right hand. I did not crush or twist it. I applied only enough pressure to make clear that she could not overpower me. Then I peeled her fingers from my arm, one by one, and pushed her hand away. I smoothed the wrinkled fabric of my sleeve. "I will have exactly what I already have," I said. I did not raise my voice. 283 Marines who would die for me, a career built on actual honor, and a grandmother who remembers my goddamn name. Diane recoiled as if I had struck her. Behind her, the dining room door opened a few inches, and Paige looked out. Her mascara was smeared. Genuine tears stood in her eyes now, not because she had suddenly understood all the damage, but because the glossy world that protected her had collapsed. I offered no comfort. People who respect you only after discovering your power do not get immediate access to your forgiveness. I stepped around Diane, pushed open the door, and returned to the private room. 21 people remained frozen around the table. No one was eating. Robert stared at Gerald with contempt, while Gerald studied his empty glass. I walked to my chair, but did not sit. I stood behind it with my feet shoulder-width apart, and my hands clasped behind my back. "I will never sit at a table where my parents intentionally degrade my service," I said. My voice reached every corner of the room. "This is not punishment. It is a boundary." The door slammed behind me as Diane rushed back inside. Rage shook through her body. "I am your mother!" she screamed. A wooden cane struck the floor with a sharp crack. "Sit down, Diane," Grandma Ruth commanded. Her voice was not frail. It carried the authority of the family matriarch, the one person Diane had not expected to oppose her publicly. Diane stopped. She looked at Ruth, and then at the Ellsworths, who regarded her as if the decay beneath her polished appearance had finally become visible. The fight drained from her shoulders. She shuffled back to her chair and collapsed into it. I crossed the room and knelt beside Ruth's wheelchair. She took my scarred right hand in both of hers. She did not recoil from the rough skin or the raised white lines across my knuckles. Her thumb moved over them gently. Then she pressed a small, tightly folded piece of paper into my palm. "You won," she whispered. Her eyes were bright with tears. I closed my fingers around the note and stood. At the far end of the table, Catherine watched with quiet approval. "Thank you for asking the question, Admiral," I said. A slow, precise smile touched the corners of her mouth. She gave me one crisp nod. "Thank you for answering it, Major." I turned and walked out without looking at Diane, Gerald, or Paige. By then they felt like ghosts, remnants of a battlefield I no longer occupied. My steps were measured as I crossed the hallway. The oak door swung closed behind me, and the brass latch caught with a final click. For the first time, the sound did not feel like I was being shut out. It felt like the past had been locked behind me. I drove 3 miles down the dark Indiana highway before pulling into the gravel lot of an empty church. The truck tires crunched over loose stones. I shifted into park, turned the key, and listened as the engine rumbled into silence. Inside the cab, the quiet pressed against my ears. I switched on the dome light. A weak yellow glow spread across the dashboard. The paper Ruth had given me was still crushed inside my fist. I opened my hand and smoothed the note against the steering wheel. The sheet was rough, the ink faded, and the handwriting unsteady, but every letter had been pressed firmly into the page. It read, Your mother inherited fear. You inherited courage. Do not wait for them to see you. The people who matter already do. I read it once, then again. 10 years of discipline had built steel walls around my chest. I had walked through mud, fire, exhaustion, and loneliness, while pretending it did not matter that my own family had thrown me away. I had learned to function through pain, issue orders with a steady voice, and carry responsibility without showing weakness. But inside that parked truck, Ruth's words found the fracture beneath the armor. My throat closed. A sharp ache split through the center of my ribs. I lowered my head onto the steering wheel, felt the cold plastic against my forehead, and cried. It was not a restrained or graceful release. My breathing broke into harsh, uneven gasps, and my shoulders shook with the weight of everything I had refused to feel. 10 years of humiliation, rejection, rage, and grief finally drained out of me in the dark. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Ruth's old handkerchief. The rough cotton, embroidered with RH, absorbed the tears she had once ordered me never to use it for. For years I had obeyed, because I thought strength meant refusing to break. That night I understood something different. Crying did not make me a victim. It meant the war was over, and my body finally believed it was safe enough to release the pain. The fallout moved through Carver, like a controlled demolition. Small towns survive on gossip, and the truth from the Ellsworth dinner reached the country club by Monday morning. Diane lost control of the narrative she had polished for decades. People learned that she had publicly mocked a Marine major to impress wealthy strangers, only to have a former admiral expose the lie with a challenge coin and a federal contract. The image of the perfect Holloway family did not merely crack. It disappeared. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a text from Gerald. I am sorry, Chloe. I should have said something at the table. I stared at the words for a long time. It was a coward's apology, offered only after someone more powerful had made silence embarrassing. He had watched Diane degrade me for years. He had nodded while she did it. At the engagement dinner, he had added his own insult and laughed. Now that the Ellsworths despised him and Carver knew the truth, he wanted credit for regret. I did not respond. I was not angry. Anger would have required an emotional connection that no longer existed. I felt nothing except clarity. I swiped across the screen and deleted the message. It vanished without ceremony. Page took longer. A month later, security called from the main visitor gate at my base in North Carolina. A silver sedan had arrived, and the woman inside claimed to be my sister. She had driven 12 hours alone. When I reached the security center, Paige sat beneath the fluorescent lights, looking smaller than I remembered. She wore no silk, no dramatic jewelry, and no carefully constructed glamour. Only a plain gray sweater and tired eyes. For the first time in our lives, she had arrived without Diane standing behind her, explaining who she was supposed to be and who I was supposed to remain. The golden child protection had been stripped away. The lie that had defined us for a decade had been crushed under the weight of the truth. Paige had not yet earned forgiveness, and one long drive could not erase years of contempt. But she had come to the place where I lived, entered a world she had dismissed, and finally begun trying to understand how to be a sister instead of a weapon in our mother's hand. I did not pretend everything was repaired. Some damage does not disappear because the person who caused it finally feels ashamed. Trust is not restored through tears, expensive apologies, or one dramatic gesture. It is rebuilt through repeated actions when no audience is watching. I gave Paige no promise beyond the opportunity to begin. That was more than Diane or Gerald had ever offered me. The following Monday, at 0600, I walked into the command post. The air conditioning was cold, and fluorescent lights hummed above the operations floor. Screens glowed with schedules, routes, weather updates, inventory numbers, and alerts. Marines moved with focused efficiency, each person carrying a portion of a system designed to keep others alive. Master Sergeant Maria entered my office and placed a ceramic mug on the steel desk. "Black coffee, dark roast," she said. The bitter, burned smell rose into the air. "Morning, Major." "Morning, Master Sergeant." She gave a sharp nod and returned to the operations floor. There was no performance in the exchange, no demand for praise, and no manipulation disguised as affection. There was trust, Maria knew I would protect the unit, and I knew she would tell me the truth even when it was difficult. That quiet certainty meant more than every hollow speech Diane had ever delivered about family. I woke my encrypted laptop and opened a secure email channel. A new message waited from Catherine Ellsworth. Major Holloway, families are complicated, but the battlefield is not. We received your revised logistics parameters. The contract is expanding. Prepare your unit for the next phase. I read it twice and leaned back in my chair. A slow smile formed. Diane's voice returned to me from the dinner table. Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks, kind of like a janitor. She had been right about one thing, though not in the way she intended. I was a cleaner. I identified risk before it spread. I cleared threats, corrected failures, and managed chaos, so Marines had what they needed when the mission turned dangerous. I built routes through uncertainty and made sure ammunition, fuel, medicine, food, and evacuation support arrived where they were supposed to be. It was dirty work. It left scars. It did not come with a glamorous corner office or an audience ready to applaud. But it mattered. I reached across the desk and touched the brass shell casing beside my keyboard. The metal was cool and heavy beneath my fingertips. It reminded me that the real world does not care about social status, expensive clothing, or carefully rehearsed smiles. When lives depend on a decision, appearance has no value. Competence, loyalty, courage, and accountability are what remain. Blood does not automatically create a family. Biology is an accident. Real family is forged through mutual respect and proven in difficult moments. It is the grandmother who waits on a dark porch with $800 and a handkerchief. It is the master sergeant who brings coffee before sunrise and stands beside you when the situation turns dangerous. It is the former Admiral who recognizes your service when your own parents choose to erase it. It is every Marine who trusts your orders because you have earned that trust. I no longer owed my sanity to people who treated me as a burden. I did not need Gerald's delayed apology, Diane's approval, or Paige's old admiration to validate my rank, my scars, or my life. I had spent years believing that one more promotion, one more deployment, one more achievement, or one more sacrifice might finally force my parents to see me. Ruth's note freed me from that mission. The people who mattered already did. Diane had taken her fear, disappointment, and resentment and tried to make them my identity. I took the ashes of her contempt and built a life of purpose on top of them. The war began in a bleach-scented kitchen when I was 22, but it did not end when Catherine dropped the gold challenge coin. It ended in the moment I stopped needing my family to admit that I had won. I had survived the world they predicted would destroy me. I had become a Marine officer, a commander, a homeowner, and a leader responsible for hundreds of lives. I had entered rooms filled with powerful people and been respected because my work spoke before I did. I had built a family from loyalty instead of biology, and a future from discipline instead of permission. My mother called me a janitor because she believed cleaning was shameful. I learned that there is honor in clearing away what is dangerous, false, and broken. That night at the Birchwood, I did not destroy my family. I cleaned the room of a lie that had poisoned us for 10 years. What remained was painful, imperfect, and real. And for the first time in my life, real was enough.